and some people don't. All right. This is the last section of the book we will be covering. It says, now that you have some JavaScript skills, you are ready to learn jQuery. Now, I don't like that sentence because guess what? jQuery is JavaScript. All right, but it's just a part of JavaScript. All right. In Chapter 8, we're going to start working, as it says, you'll learn a working subset of jQuery that will get you off to a fast start. So in other words, we're starting to learn what it's about. Now, really take note of what's in here. And if you don't know what I mean, you will when we get done with this chapter. Okay? Chapter 9. So it says by the end of Chapter 8, we can use image swaps, image rollovers, and have an FAQ page done with jQuery. Not with just standard or what's sometimes called vanilla JavaScript. And it's called that because it's devoid of any extra features or functionality. It's just JavaScript. Maybe just JavaScript or only JavaScript would have been a better name. In Chapter 9, we will start using some of the power of jQuery because it's got a lot of tools in there to do special effects, animations, have things fade in, fade out, move things, animate stuff on the screen, etc. So we'll go into that. Chapter 10, how to use jQuery features when you work with forms. There are both built-in things and things that you can code. jQuery has a rich collection of what are called plugins. Now they say they're going to show you them in Chapter 11, but we'll also talk about them in Chapter 10. All right. Finally, Chapter 12 is probably the hardest chapter. This is one of the reasons I think you should keep your book for the fall class next year, because what this chapter does is it shows you how to use AJAX and JSON. AJAX is an acronym that stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The funny thing is, it doesn't really mean that anymore because very few people use the X part. Instead of using XML, they use JSON for data. But AJAG probably wouldn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense now. All right, so they kept the name. And as it says, it allows you to get data from a web server without refreshing the page. Have you ever done this where you've gone out to like Google Maps and then you've gone in and you've gotten closer, you've done a closer and a closer and a closer thing? Do you notice when you do that, it doesn't redraw the page? It used to be when you used applications like that, you get a little blip. It was called flicker. It would go like this. It would, boom, it would reload a new page. It would do it real fast, but if you watched, you could see that. Well, one of the things that you get with AJAX is it's removed that. Now, it's funny because, and we'll go back over this again when we get to Chapter 12, but it used to be, they changed it though, and I love the fact that they had it this way, but of course they changed it. I'm not a big, video guy, but it used to be you could come out here, and on their home page, they would show all their newest videos, okay? And you could put your mouse here, and when you did, it would put a little bubble would pop up with an explanation of what the movie was about. You with me? And then when you moved off of it, it would go away, and if you moved on to another one, that little bubble would pop up. That was all done with AJAX. That was one of the best ways I could think of showing it to you. All right? When we go over that, the last test that you have in here will be just on that one chapter. That's probably the hardest chapter there is in this textbook. All right? Even with the ones that follow, the ones in the last section. The last chapter of the whole book is kind of difficult too. All right? But this is, if it's not the hardest, it's darn close to it. All right, so we're jumping into Chapter 8. Get off to a fast start with jQuery. All right, I'm going to go till 8:55, and then we're going to break for 10 minutes, and then we'll start up again at 9:05. So what do we have? An introduction to jQuery, what jQuery is. Okay, it's a JavaScript library. Some places will even say it's a JavaScript library that supercharges JavaScript by allowing you to do things in just a few lines of code and using CSS that would normally take many more lines. All right, maybe that's not a great explanation. That's probably not the one they'll give, but that's kind of the way it was explained to me. how jQuery can simplify JavaScript development, again, with using the built-in stuff, and it often results in much less code. So the basics, how to include jQuery in your web page. We're going to look at this. We did earlier, but we're going to look at it again. There's at least 3 different ways that you can include jQuery in your web page. I'm going to show you all 3. All right? How to code jQuery selectors. It's not going to look that different from when we used the $ for document.getElementById. The difference is going to be that $ now means jQuery. It doesn't mean, so that line that you always put in there, that, var $ equals, don't put that line in anymore. All right? So we'll talk about some of the built-in jQuery methods, some of the built-in jQuery event methods. Now, if you want to know all of them, you would, of course, go out to jquery.com, and up here, it says API documentation. And if you click on that, it shows you those are all of the methods, and they're in alphabetic order. Why am I telling you that? Because when you are taking your tests in here and you're looking for how to do something, and you say, I wonder if there's a jQuery method to do that, that might be a fine place to start. Does that make sense? All right. So then we will look at that email list that we did before, but doing it solely with jQuery. I shouldn't say solely, but utilizing jQuery. All right. Then we'll talk about some of the selectors, some of the methods, some of the event methods. And notice it says the most useful. Well, if you read something and it says this is the best, isn't it that person's opinion? When you think about it. So to say the most useful, well, in the author's minds, these are the most useful selectors, methods, and event methods. And I'm not saying they're wrong. All right, I'm just saying that there are other ones that you may use quite often that aren't in this list. And some of the ones that are in this list, you might not use very often. It just depends on what it is you're doing. All right? And then they end up with 3 illustrative applications. All right, we're going to take a break in just a second. In fact, I'm just going to pause this right now. All right, let's continue on then. So, starting on 226, there's the introduction to jQuery. You probably know this if you watched me do this before, but if you look right here, you go out to jquery.com. I'm going to go back. I'm on the API now. There's jquery.com. When you click the download button, there's many ways that you can download this. All right. First of all, notice if I download the compressed production version, I can click on here, and that's jQuery. All of the extra line breaks and stuff have been removed, but it's all there. So I could save this, for example, I could make a JS folder, and I could save it as like jquery.js, and then I could use anything that's in there. Does that make sense? All right. Or I could use the uncompressed version. A lot easier to read. That's jQuery. And I could copy that. And then normally you save it as like jQuery.min, meaning it's, the first one would have been .min.js, meaning it's minified. You removed all this stuff. And this would be like jQuery.js. Now, that's all fine and dandy. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But there's an easier way of doing it than using one of those ways. And that is, if I keep coming down here, you use what's called a CDN, or a content delivery network. So if I go to a content delivery network, notice I can come here, says jQuery CDN provided by StackPath. So I can go here, and I guess they're going to show it to me from there. I don't want that. But the point is that if I want to see all of the available CDNs, and that's what we've been doing thus far. We've actually done this when we used like Bootstrap. That's usually the way that people do it, is they use a content delivery network. And I think I've shown you this also, but if I go out to cdnjs.com, that's content delivery network, js.com, and I come in here and I type in jQuery. Well, what does it have? A lot of them, but it's got this one. Usually the first one is the one you want, and there it is. You want the minified version, because if you can have the big one, but you should never ever change this file. Did everybody hear that? You should never change this file. But you want the minified because it's smaller, so it'll load faster. That's why. Now, the bad news about doing this is you must have an internet connection because it's going out to the internet to find the file. So if you're working and you're in your car, driving, not driving, but you're a passenger in a car or whatever, and you're working and you don't have Wi-Fi in your car, that might not work. All right? Or if you're at a place that doesn't have a Wi-Fi hotspot, etc., it may not work. Typically, though, this is the way that people do it. All right? Just so you're aware of that. All right. So again, says jQuery is a free open source JavaScript library that provides dozens, if not closer to 100 or more methods for common web features that make JavaScript programming easier. The functions have been coded and tested for cross-browser compatibility. They should even work with older browsers. All right, even with older versions of IE, for example, they should work. Okay, and the funny thing is, when this book came out back in like 2019, 2018, jQuery was used on probably between 85 and 90% of the top 100,000 websites in the world. So it's pretty popular, correct? Well, there's a lot of places that are going away from jQuery because they say it's actually too hard to use. And I believe with Bootstrap 5, we're using 4 for our Bootstrap, but 5, which is in beta mode right now, I think they've replaced jQuery in there. Even with that said, if we're talking about, let's say 100 million sites, and let's say that 90 million of them use jQuery, they're not going to just flick a switch and stop using it tomorrow. They're going to use it as long as it's supported, which will be for all of my lifetime and probably your lifetimes too. All right. So you already saw the website. I'm not going to read any of this stuff because we've already looked at it. As it says, by a vast majority of the 1 million most visited websites. You can find different statistics. What was that? There's a saying, what are there? There's statistics and damn statistics, meaning that you can find statistics that say almost anything. But it's still out there, it's still used, it's still popular. That's the bottom line. All right? So, how can it be used to simplify JavaScript development? Well, that's why we're going to use it. Okay? Sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that. Okay. Okay. And it says Figure 8.2 shows the jQuery for the FAQ application that you learn how to develop in Chapter 6. So in other words, they're rewriting that frequently asked questions application, but they're rewriting it using jQuery. Hopefully what you'll see when you take a look at that is how much code they've saved and how easy it is to flip back and forth between that plus sign and the minus sign that are in there. Okay? All right. It says it's much easier to understand once you learn how to use the selectors, the methods, the event methods, etc. So, it says, incidentally, jQuery uses CSS selectors. What does that mean? So what does this mean? That $ means jQuery. That's a shortcut for the word jQuery. And jQuery is always lowercase j, uppercase q, lowercase u-e-r-y. That's just the way it is. All right? And what it says is, what this is going to do is it's going to select any H2 element that has an ID of X. All right? It says, in fact, jQuery supports all CSS selectors, even in older browsers. Again, another reason for using it. So let's look at that example because that's a little confusing. You've seen this example before. You have looked at this example before. Hint, hint, you should understand how to write an example like this using jQuery for your next test. All right, an FAQ page or something similar. So this HTML I don't believe has changed. It's the same HTML we saw before. So what's new? There's the CSS. I don't believe that's changed. What has changed is this. This is the jQuery. All right? And you'll notice, and they're going to even show you a shortcut for this in just a minute, but quite often this is the first line that you'll see in a jQuery program right there. You see this? That's in blue right there? And the document.ready in English, what it means is, don't make this code available until the document has been loaded into the memory of the machine. Does that make sense? All right. So what this says right here is anytime you click an H2 element with an ID of facts, anytime you click it, if it was a minus, make it a plus. If it was a plus, make it a minus. Does that make sense? It's the same kind of stuff that we have been doing, but it took more JavaScript code. All right. And it says here, if it was not equal to minus, hide it. Otherwise, show it. Well, you know what that means already because we've seen this up here. The plus sign means hide it. The minus sign means show it. Correct? So when you click plus, it'll show what's underneath it. When you click minus, it'll hide what's underneath it. And that's what they're telling you to do right here. So it says this application illustrates the use of the ready event method. All right. It says a jQuery selector that's just like the CSS selector and 5 different methods. The one that you're going to end up using a lot is the third one down. See where it says toggle class? Toggle class is a light switch. Would you agree that a light switch is on or off? Would you agree with that? Well, when you toggle something, if it was on, you're turning it off. If it was off, you're turning it on. Notice we're toggling the minus class. So if it was a minus, we're making it a plus. If it was a plus, we're making it a minus. Does all that make sense? All right. And if it was a minus, we want to hide what's there. And if it's a plus, we want to show what's there. All right. And it says all these make jQuery easier than JavaScript programming. So a natural question would be, okay, it's kind of like I've given you that example before of going from long division to short division. If this is so simple, why did we learn regular JavaScript to begin with? Because there are still millions of sites out there that do it the old way, the pre-jQuery way. And you've got to know how to do it both ways. Just so you know, as an example, if we were going to create a slideshow, you can create a slideshow virtually just using CSS. You can create a slideshow just using vanilla JavaScript with no jQuery. You can create a slideshow using jQuery. You can create a slideshow using something like Bootstrap. You're going to find all of those out there in the real world. So you should at least be familiar with how to interact with any of them. Does that make sense to everyone? So the basics of jQuery programming, how to include it onto your web page. It's what I just showed you. Okay? Here's the different releases of jQuery. Okay? Now, a couple big things. I believe it was, yeah, there you go. In jQuery 2. There were many versions of jQuery 1, more than what are shown here. Okay? But when they got to jQuery 2, they finally said, we're giving up on you people who are using IE 6, 7, or 8. We're not going to support you, so we're going to make jQuery available, but we will make it available for IE 9, IE 10, IE Edge, etc. But those older versions, it's just not worth our trouble. You can go online and you can find sites that will show you the percentage of people who are using older browsers like that. My guess is, if I had to guess, that the number of people using IE 6 through 8 are less than 5%. All right. Then when they got to version 3, notice what they did. They added what's called a slim version. You may have noticed that, again, when we go out here to our Get Bootstrap. I believe that this has got it. So if I go to Get Started, and I go down here to the separate right here, slim.min.js. All right, what they said was it's probably the components that people are going to use virtually all the time. So there's certain components that aren't supported. I don't remember what they are. All right. If you have any doubt, you don't download the slim one, you download the full jQuery. Okay? And again, they just keep offering more and more support. Now notice that was as of September 16th. If I go out here, and it says the current one is 3.5.1. Well, in our book, it says the current one was 3.1.1. All right. If you don't know these, and I think I mentioned them before, but just so you know, the first number is what's known as the version number. All right. So this is version 3. The second number is known as the release number. So this is version 3, release 1. The last number that's in there typically is a fix. It's an update to something that they put in to this number that either didn't work or they made work better. All right. So there literally could have been dozens of things between 3.1.1 in September 2016 and the 3.5.1 that you see right now. There probably were several. All right. So again, when you put this in, it is recommended, even though if you're doing a website that you're going to look at and no one else is ever going to look at, you know it's just for you. You're not putting it on the web. It's totally for you. Technically, you don't need this integrity or this cross-origin. They're put in there as a way that when those are in there, they're put in there to assure that the version that you're copying or the version that you are referring to in a CDN, that they haven't been messed with by any outside people. And if you don't think that happens, I was just reading an article the other day that there's all these places that literally the newest thing is, you know, when people have, not spam, but when they have malware, they do bad things, the newest things are all with a pandemic. All right, and it's just terrible. People prey on other people, but they do it. All right, okay. How to code jQuery selectors. Let's take a look at this. When you use jQuery, you start by selecting the element or elements that you want to apply jQuery to, as small as a single paragraph or a single H1 tag or a single button, etc. Or you could apply it to all H1 tags or to all buttons or to all paragraphs, or you could apply it to everything with an ID of something or to everything with a class of something. All the stuff that we've been talking about for the last couple months. All right. So it says when you start to code a jQuery selector, you start with the $, followed by a set of parentheses, and then inside of quotation marks. And most of the time people use double quotes, but usually I believe single quotes will always work as well. I don't even remember what they use here. All right. Then you code the CSS selector for the element or elements you want to select. We'll look at that in just a minute. So it says the HTML and the examples show how easy it is to select one or more elements with jQuery. Again, easy is a relative term. When you're starting to learn to swim, you know, if Michael Phelps was next to me, he'd be like, this is easy. I can't do what he can do. I never could do and never will be able to do what he is able to do. All right? So easy to one person may not be easy to somebody else. So let's bounce back and forth between these. So that's the syntax. $, then in parentheses, the selector. All right. So it says the HTML for the elements that are selected by the examples. So this is the HTML that they're going to use. Now let's look at this. What do we have? Well, we have an H1 tag that doesn't have any. It does not have any class or any ID. I think you'd agree with that. Then we've got an H2 tag with a class. Then we've got an anchor tag without anything special. All right. Then we've got a div without anything special, a paragraph with nothing special, an H2 tag with nothing special, a div with nothing special. All right. And a main with an ID. I don't think I missed anything, and if I did, I didn't try to. All right. So how do you select things that are in here? Well, that would select every paragraph. Does that make sense? Because you've got $, then just a P. If one of these paragraphs, they don't, but let's say this paragraph had an ID of 3. We wouldn't do it like that then. All right? This is, all right, the element with FAQS as its ID. Well, what has FAQS as its ID? Right there. Right? So that's selecting basically that element. This is all elements with the minus sign as a class. Do you notice? If it's an ID, it must start with a pound sign and the name of the ID. If it's a class, with a dot and the name of the class. Very similar to the way that we set it up in our actual CSS files. All right. Now, this is where it gets ugly as heck. Because if you remember when we talked about the DOM, one of the things that we talked about was, the relationships. So we had the root at the top, and then you had the body and the HTML, etc. You had the HTML at the top, and then you had the head and the body. And the head and the body were siblings, all right? And the head and the body were children of the HTML, and then the stuff underneath there. Well, it's sort of the same thing here. So if you look here, this says all P elements that are descendants of the main element. Well, this says, remember, if you look up on the screen here, when that main was the thing that had the ID of FAQS, correct? So this says any paragraph that falls underneath main. That's exactly what it's saying. All right? This says adjacent siblings. This says all divs that are adjacent siblings of H2s. What does that mean? That means that divs that are at the same level as an H2. All right. This one, general siblings. This says any paragraph that's a sibling, so any paragraph that's right underneath of an unordered list. This says all UL elements that are children of div elements. Notice you got a greater than sign, a plus sign. A lot of times, the best place to go to learn how to use this is the jQuery site and to start looking at the documentation. All right. You can also have multiple selectors. So again, when you use jQuery, the $sign at the beginning refers to the jQuery library. Then inside of parentheses and double quotes, as it says, you code the selectors using the same kind of CSS syntax that we have been using. All right. jQuery wouldn't be that great if it didn't provide more than that. So here are some of the selectors. I shouldn't say that. These are some of the methods that it provides. All right. So notice in the past we used that dot value. Now it's val. See that? Why am I telling you that? Because you're used to writing dot value, and now you're going to have to change it to be able to use jQuery. All right. So this is a getter. Why? Because there's nothing in it. It's telling us to get the value of that. This is a setter. So inside of the val, if you put something in there, you're setting that value. All right. Notice all of these. Get, set, get, set, get. See that? So when there's nothing inside, it's a getter. When there's something inside, it's a setter. And next right there, it says get the next sibling. All right. Submit. Well, what I could do, we haven't done it exactly like this before, but we could go in and we could check that if you click the submit button, we could put some code right there that would check and probably validate the form. That makes sense? Isn't that kind of what we did? But we did it in regular JavaScript. All right, and focus, you know what that means already. So here's some examples. Notice the first two. The first one will grab whatever value is in the text box that's got an ID of gallons. All right, and it will take that and it will basically assign that value to a variable called gallons. Does that make sense? All right. The second one will allow us to take whatever is in that text box and it'll empty it out. It'll clear it. All right. The next one, and you've seen this already, is if either underneath, like I showed you in that form example, or to the right, we would have a span that was called email address error. And it wouldn't show unless you put in an invalid or missing email address. Then it would show it right there. Does the stuff I'm saying make sense to you? I mean, once you start working with it, it'll probably make more sense. when you do this stuff, you can also do what's called chaining. If you look here, this dot this dot this. Sometimes, just so you know, I just want to show you this. Hopefully I can copy this okay. It worked. It's totally legal to do it like this. See that? The reason I'm telling you that is not with what we'll do in here, but an actual application code out on the web. You might see a dozen things chained. And you want the line to be this long where you got to keep scrolling and scrolling. I don't. So a lot of times you'll see it like that, or it might even be like that. Something like that. Again, it doesn't matter how you do it, but the way you do it, you should be consistent if you're writing the code. All right? All right. So that would be submitting that form. Okay? That would be moving the focus. All right. I think that everything that's in here we've already gone over. All right. These are event methods. Okay? Here's the two most common. The first one is that document ready that we talked about. And now you learn the shortcut. See this? You can either write your first line of jQuery like this that you see in blue, or you can write it like this. What's the difference? You don't have to write the document.ready. You'll still sometimes see it. You'll still sometimes see it where people will literally write here instead of the $, they'll put the word jQuery there. All right? But the only thing consistent about this stuff is the inconsistency. That's not meant to be funny. It's not funny. But people don't ever do things the same way. Two people, never do everything the same way. All right. But we've got the ready handler, and the other one's the click handler. And you probably have already guessed, not always, but most of the time with a click handler, it's going to be for a button. Not always, though. We can set up jQuery so that we've got an unordered list. Okay? And as an example, every time you click an element on the list, you could make it disappear. You could change its color. You could click on the heading for the list to add a new element. You can do all that kind of stuff with jQuery. So we're talking about expanding even more what we've gone into in chapter 6 and 7, talking about the DOM, but trying to do it in a way that will hopefully result in you writing less code. Okay? All right. So again, these two things would do the same thing. Here's a click event. It says when you click any H2, it will bring up an alert that says this heading has been clicked. That's not going to help you very much, but they're just showing you syntactically how you would write that. All right? And then they're combining the two together. Now let's look at this. To code an event handler, you code a selector, the dot operator, and the method, and an anonymous function that handles the event within parentheses. Again, that anonymous that's in here, that's this. Look at it. This whole thing. Can everybody see what's in blue right there? Can you all see this? That all goes together. And the reason I'm telling you that is that parenthesis right there starts here, it ends there. See that? That curly brace starts there and it ends there. And then you put a semicolon on the end. This is going to be, if you understand this, this is one of the hallmarks of being able to get into Node.js in full. Because virtually everything we do is going to be done like this. All right? Technically, this function right here is called a callback function, which means click the H2, when you're ready, call that function. So it'll do the alert. Now, with many things, with these, this is not a great callback example, but with many of these things, it's instantaneous. I clicked it and boom, I get it. But think about it, if I was telling the system to go out, let's say I'm on one website and I'm ordering something, and in order for me to order it, it's got to go out to another website. So let's say Amazon's out of something and it has to go to someplace else. Would you agree that if I did that, my order might not be instantaneous? Would you agree with that? All right. And a lot of times that's what happens. We haven't talked databases yet in here other than Angie, but you will next semester. And sometimes database things, when you ask a database for information, it takes a while for information to come back to you. All right? That's when callbacks become even more important. And there's different ways that you can do callbacks. I don't want to get into that right now. All right? So as it says, the event handler for the ready event will run any methods as soon as the DOM is ready, even if the browser is loading images. That's a big thing. jQuery will start to run even if you're putting in very intricate images. You might say, well, who cares? You should care. All right? And the reason that you should care, the reason that this should matter to you, all right, is this is one of the reasons people use jQuery. Because if you've got a very intricate image or many images that are loading that take a while, you can start working with them even if they haven't been loaded yet. All right? In this book, the ready event is always coded the long way. That way. So they're always going to do it this way, even though you do it this way. And you might say, why? Because for a long time, this was the only way you could do it, and you'd see a lot of code out there with it put that way. All right? As it says, when you code this, the use of the curly braces like I showed you, the parentheses, and the semicolons is critical. You can screw something up by just missing something like that, for lack of better words. All right, so here's the email list application. In other words, there it is. Do you see how, if we make a gas guzzler site, we could have this? This would be right here. Ours would be set up actually very similar to this. This would be something like miles driven. This would be gallons used, and that would be MPG. This would be a disabled field. This would be set up that if you put in something non-numeric, or if you put in something out of range, we'd get a message here that would say invalid input or invalid miles driven or whatever. Same kind of thing here. This would be our gallons used. And if we put in the same kind of thing, if it was invalid, we'd get a message there. Does that make sense to everybody? So they show you how you can do that here. Again, all kidding aside, you could all write this code in a matter of minutes to create the interface. All right? Notice they've come in and they have added in the head section here the jQuery. Almost always you find the jQuery down at the bottom in the body section. All right? But when you look here, there's the HTML, nothing big here. Then they give you the jQuery. They're not even worrying about the CSS right here. So as it says here, we're going to look at the code in just a minute on 241. But as the author says here, all right, the figure presents the jQuery for the application. The code that's included is going to be shown. So here all of the jQuery is highlighted and the rest of it is JavaScript. Again, I don't like the way they refer to that just because of the fact it's all JavaScript. I don't know why books say stuff like this, but they do. All right, so let's go look in here. So what's new? What's new is the stuff in yellow. Again, the old-fashioned way of doing this, this is telling us that when we click on that join list button, right there, this is .val instead of .value like we had done previously. So if we click that button, this is what we want to do. We want to take what they put in for that first email address and put it into our variable email address 1. Take what they put into that second text box and put it into email address 2, and here's a Boolean variable. Again, ours would be let's instead of the word var. Then we validate. If it's empty, should be triple equal sign, but if it's empty, what do? Well, that thing in here, that .next, .text, that's that extra thing that we put in there. In fact, if you go back up, that is this thing right here. Does that make sense? You have to go and look in here where they put it. That's the span. So it starts out as it'll be a red. These three things will have a red asterisk by them. All right? And they are this span here, that span here, that span there. If everything is cool, so you put a valid value in, you'll put nothing in there, and that's this. Otherwise, you're going to put this field as required. We could also make another check that would check for range. Does that make sense? So this is just an if-else. We could have had if it's empty, else if it's out of range, else do this. All right? Know how to do that kind of stuff. I'm just telling you. All right? Then we do the same thing with email address too, and the same thing with the first name. Then we get down to the bottom here. This means that is valid thing that we set up above to true. If we put in a bad email address, 1, or a bad email address, 2, or a bad first name, then invalid will be false. Would you all agree with that? It might be false and we're hitting it false again, we're hitting it false again. So it could be false 0 times, 1 time, 2 times, or 3 times. If it is not invalid, in other words, if is valid, remember that's a shortcut for is valid equal true, then we submit the form. Boom. All right. And you might say, well, who cares? Well, if we go back and we write the one that we just, we looked at for our last test with this, it's going to result in a lot less code. All right. Now they come in again. This is some of the useful selectors. Again, I don't know about you. When you look at this, I don't know how many are in here. My guess is around 20. I would never be able to memorize these. And the bad thing is they're constantly updating, upgrading the application. You don't want to memorize them. But you want to know, for instance, let's look at this :even. See that? Okay, so I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go to the API documentation, and I'm going to look and see if they've got something that's got :even in it. And there it is. All right, it says .even, but it's probably, oh, there's the selector. Sorry, the one underneath it. So I click on here, and it shows me what that is and a working example. So if you are taking a test or working on an assignment and something doesn't make sense, and you say, I have to use this one, or if you're not sure which one to use, go to the API documentation and start searching, or Google it, and then go into the API and look at the examples that are here. What you're typically going to find, please look on the screen. This is the most important thing so far. That's all the jQuery right there. That's all you need. What is that doing? That's setting the background color to every other row to this color right here. And it's doing it literally with one line, because it's 3 lines, but 2 of them are the script tags. Okay? But to do that, you do have to include jQuery. All right? Questions? Hopefully that made at least some sense to you. So these are some of the selectors you'll use the most often. Some of them just make sense. Is something empty? Is something equal to something else? Work only with even things. Work only with odd things. The first thing that's in there. The first child that's in there. The last child that's in there, etc. Some of those should make sense to you. All right? And they give you some examples. All right? The only way to get better with this is to practice it. All right? And I know I keep throwing a lot of the same stuff at you all the time. But if you go out to w3schools.com, you go to the tutorials, and you go out to Learn jQuery, I've gone through this many times. And I usually learn something new every time I go through it. And again, sometimes the best thing to go through in here is to just use their examples. So notice, you can probably figure out what this does. This.hide. What does that do? It says if I click on a paragraph, make it hide. Does that make sense? All right. And if I change this, for example, I think this will work. In fact, I'll have to do this. But I'm going to change that to toggle. Don't know if that'll work. Nope. You're right. All right. In fact, I didn't want to toggle it like that because, did you see they showed? But I toggle them off right away. All right. But you're going to learn this, and the other thing that's really nice about these is it also starts showing you the effects. So little hint for you, you might want to know how to do something like this for your next test. How to make something fade in. All right? So notice, see that? You can make them fade in, you can make them fade out, you can make them fade toggle. All right? Oh, and they also mentioned on the bottom here, in Chapter 9, you'll learn about the selector that's used with animation. They're keeping this just the stuff that you'd use more often with textual type of things. I mean, you can animate with text too, but a lot of times when you animate, it's a whole nother ball game, so to speak, and we'll get that in the next chapter. So here's some other methods that you can use. All right. I've already mentioned there's an add class, there's a remove class, there's a toggle class. All right. Those are three of the ones that you're going to use quite often. Show and hide, those are not other ones that you're going to use quite often. And again, this book is golden in that they show you examples of how to use it. All right, and here's when the different events happen. So again, not only is there the ready event and the click event, there's a double click, there's mouse events. Again, might be more important, especially if you're doing things like games. They might have other reasons too, if you want to know your position on the screen at any time. Hover, all right, and as always, with examples. All right, and as it says, the table above presents the ones that you'll use the most. In the author's opinion, probably, at least probably, the author's correct. All right, they will be the ones that you will use most often. All right, not included, as they say, are key down, key press up, key up, etc. The prevent default, remember this? We used event.prevent default, so if you click on a hyperlink, for example, and you don't want to go someplace, you can do that you can use that in here too. Some of these things, as it says, were deprecated in older versions and removed in the newest versions. It says you may see them in older code examples, but when something is deprecated, again, it means it's been replaced with something else and it's not being supported anymore. So even though it may still appear in code, and if you go to work for a company and you say to your boss, hey, this is deprecated, your boss might say, I don't care. Keep it in there anyway because it still works. But you shouldn't write new code using anything that's deprecated. And that's all they're saying. All right, some more things that you should be aware of here. These are important. Now look at this. On and off. On attaches an event handler to an event. So notice, this attaches the on method. Okay, so when you click something with this, and there's a shortcut. What's the shortcut? You don't use the word on. So why do they provide it? Because some people still use it. Not always, and I'm not sure in this case, but sometimes in the olden days, like 5-10 years ago, you had to do it that way, and then they made it easier. And they're just showing it to you because there's at least a chance you'll still see that in code today. It says event methods named bind and unbind, which used to be used a lot, were also deprecated. All right. So the chapter ends, we got about, 10 pages left or so, but the chapter literally ends with 3 different illustrative applications. Now, look at this and, boy, that makes sense. I can do that now. But you've got a point of reference to go to now. All right? So as it says, this is the FAQ application similar to the one in Chapter 6, but this time it uses jQuery. All right. Notice, within the function of the event handler, the this keyword, this always means the current element. It's whatever you're working with. That's what this is. You use this also, you use it in other languages as well, not just in JavaScript. So, you've seen this, you've used this, you've written something like this many times. This, again, it's not exactly, but it's pretty much what we were shown before. All right? And what I sent to you this morning, although I know you had it already, but I just sent it anyway, and that was, I came in here And where is it? Of course, I can't find it now. Then I'll look at it in here. So I sent you two things this morning. All right? And where are they? They're in my sent, because I did not include them, put myself on the list. All right? So the first thing I sent you was this. And it's the code from Chapter 8, Chapter 9, Chapter 10, Chapter 11, and Chapter 12 specifically. All right? And why? Who cares? Well, because someplace in here, in my message junk, and I don't know where it is right now, but I've saved it too, and you can open it up, and for Chapter 8, you can look at any of these applications. Does that make sense? All right. What's, in my opinion, or whatever my opinion is or is not worth, they write these books purposely in this way. So I'm on page 250. So on page 250, they explain everything that's on page 251. If you want to really learn how to do this where it makes some sense to you, open up both these pages. That's why it's nicer to have a hard copy, all right? Unless you've got the ability, but if you've got the PDF, you know, with some PDF packages, you can put it in two-page mode, all right? But I would suggest going through it like that because it's not going to make a lot of sense until you do. All right? Then they do the same thing with an image swap. So what is that? It's expected that if you, for example, if you were to create an app like this one, it would look professional. And I don't think that's asking too much. How does it look professional? Two big things. Number one, the thumbnails are the same size. Number two, when you click a thumbnail, it appears down below, and those are all the same size. Does that make sense? All right. It'll be expected that you are able to do something like this. And again, so they give you, this one's a little harder because they give you the intro on 252, the code, the HTML is on 253, but if you go to 254 and 255, 254 is the explanation, 255 is the actual code. Now, one thing that they're showing in here is much, not everything, but some of the stuff that's in here could have been done pre-jQuery. You could have done it with just JavaScript instead of this JavaScript library. So it says when you attach an event handler to a link, you often need to cancel the default option. What does that mean? Again, look up on the screen here. What they're saying is, I think it's, where is it? It is back a couple pages. That if you set these things up where these are hyperlinked, you want to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere except down here. Does that make sense? So you might want to do one of those prevent defaults, is what I believe the author is saying right there. So that's how you cancel it, with the prevent default. To get the event object that's passed to a method, you need to code a parameter for the event handler function. You can use whatever name you want for this parameter. In other words, what you end up putting in here. Okay? They call it EVT. You'll typically see it called one of three things. E, EVT, or the word event. It's almost always that. Quite often, it's just an E. I mean, it kind of has a universal type of meaning, for lack of better words. All right, they used EVT, and it's totally fine to do that. I mean, you could call it Joe. You could, but it doesn't make much sense to do that. All right? Okay. When you use jQuery to work with images that aren't included in the HTML, preloading them can improve the performance. All right. What they're saying is, it's nice if even before all the HTML is loaded, it's nice if the images have been loaded into memory. That's what they're saying, because you can access them faster. All right. To preload an image, you create a new image object and assign the URL for the image to that object's source attributes. As soon as that's done, the image is loaded into the browser. What does that mean? It means that's what they did up here. Then there's an image rollover, and that is on 256 and 257. It says 816 presents another application showing the power of jQuery. It's a rollover. So what they've done is they've gone back to the earlier exercises that we did in 6 and 7. They have rewritten them using jQuery. All right. So as it says in this application, when the user hovers a mouse pointer over one of the starting images, it's replaced by another image. So when you click on here, it replaces it with another image. When you click here, it replaces it with another image. Before and after. And again, I think I've even said this to you before. Have you ever seen anything for like Nutrisystem or one of those places where you lose weight? And you've got like a before picture and you put your mouse over it, it's an after picture. Get your mouse off, it goes back to the before. That's what they're talking about here. Okay? But you've got all this code now. And that's it. One more thing I want to do, and then the rest of the period will be yours. So just give me literally, hopefully we can do this in 5 minutes. And that is to quickly show you with the stuff that you've been being assigned. Notice, redo the future value app using jQuery. Create an FAQs rollover app with jQuery. Add effects. We'll worry about these two tomorrow, okay? And debug the slideshow. But these two, if you can do those, and you understand those, you should be in real good shape for the test, for the material from Chapter 8. The other one, the extra exercises, develop and expand and collapse application. Does that sound familiar? Like the FAQ? All right, then develop an image gallery application. So notice on this, you can click on any one of these links and it'll change the picture in there. Does that make sense? Hopefully you see too when you look at this why you wouldn't want these to go anywhere. You'll be using that prevent default. All right? So tomorrow when you come in here, the first thing that we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to go over, Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is going to add to what we just did, but it's going to start talking about animations. I'm not going to run through this right now, but you can see it. It's shorter than the chapter we just went over, but notice a slideshow with effects. So things like, do you want to put little dashes at the bottom where you can click to go from slide to slide, or maybe a chevrons where you've got a less than sign to go back a slide and a greater than chevron to go ahead a slide. Maybe you want to set timing that, a lot of times you do that is, if you've ever gone out to, you guys haven't, but I've gone out to like AARP, the American Association of Retired People, and when they show stuff on there, they typically, rather than having the dashes or the chevrons, they set it up because older people take more time to read things. So they might set it up that every 10 seconds it goes from slide to slide, or every 5 seconds it goes from slide to slide. Then we get into using some basic animation. Finally, we go into a slide carousel. And again, as I mentioned, it is totally possible to build a slide carousel just using HTML and CSS. You don't believe me? Google it. You'll find plenty of sites. It is totally possible to build a carousel application with just HTML, CSS, and quote, vanilla, unquote, JavaScript. But they do it here using jQuery. So we will do that tomorrow. All right? Where are we here? Right there. So this is where we are on our schedule. We're right here. We just finished Chapter 8. Again, tomorrow will be Chapter 9. On Friday, I will hand you out some kind of a pretest. It'll be lab, but we'll also go over some examples. All right. Next Monday, it's our short week next week. So next Monday will be the hands-on test. All right, on Monday. Tuesday, we'll go over 10. I don't remember how long a chapter 10 is. It's actually very short. It's 14 pages. It's amongst the shortest ones in the entire book. All right, and that's how to add forms, but I'm going to give you some stuff that's not in the book, and then we'll go over Chapter 11 a little bit longer, and Chapter 11 is on how to use plugins and widgets. All right, so we'll do that Tuesday and Wednesday. I'll give you another kind of pretest. Week from today is Thanksgiving, so no class Thursday and Friday. Notice when you come back then, we only have 3 weeks left. All right, and on those 3 weeks, the last week is going to be total lab for you, so if you're behind, it should give you a chance to catch up. The week before that, we'll spend maybe an hour or so, I don't know, as much time as you need every day so we can update. I want 7 really professional-looking portfolios turned in. All right, and then when we come back from the break, it'll be just this week. So you'll come back, you'll have a lab, we'll do the hands-on, lecture, lab, pretest, and then that week will be, that's our last test. And notice I pushed everything off. You don't have to turn in the 8 through 12 stuff until the end of the semester. If you get it done earlier, please turn it in earlier. All right, because it always seems like the last day, that night, I'm up until midnight grading. And whether you think so or not, it's really not that fun. All right. Questions on anything that we went over today? Does jQuery start to make a little sense to you? Hopefully it'll make a little bit more. And I mentioned this to you before, but I promise. Last thing I'm saying, that as we start to go into animation and the like, go to jQueryUI.com, and it shows you about 25 of the most popular things that you use. If I go to button here, notice what they have. Different kinds of button elements that you can set up, make them do different things. It says want to learn, yeah, that's not a great example, but a menu. All right. Here's how to set up a real simple menu and view the source. There it is. So if you'd have to do something like that with jQuery, you'd be able to do that. And lastly, again, please take advantage of the W3 Schools jQuery tutorial. All right, even if you spend 10 minutes on it, you do that for a week, 10 minutes the rest of the week until the test next week. That's going to help you. All right, the rest of the period then is yours.